President Cyril Ramaphosa has outlined 4 key priorities that government will focus on this year, which include defeating COVID-19 and accelerating economic recovery. The president was addressing Parliament during his State of the Nation address, with very few attendees present in the National Assembly chamber due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He says the implementation of economic reforms to create jobs and clamping down on corruption will also take priority. The rollout of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is expected to commence over the next 2 weeks. President Ramaphosa says that engagements are continuing with all coronavirus vaccine manufacturers to acquire sufficient quantities of suitable vaccines for the South African variant.
As we work to contain the spread of the virus, we also had to take extraordinary measures to support ordinary South Africans. We also had to assist businesses that were in distress and protect people's livelihoods. The social and economic relief package that we introduced in April of last year is by any account the largest intervention of its kind in the history of our country. It identified measures worth a total of 500 billion, or about 10% of our GDP, to provide cash directly to the poorest households, to provide wage support to workers, and to provide various forms of relief to struggling businesses. This had never been done in the history of our country. A total of 18 million people, or close to 1/3 of our population, received additional grant payments through these relief measures. It is estimated that this grant lifted more than 5 million people above the food poverty line, helping to alleviate hunger in a moment of great distress and crisis. To date, more than 57 billion in wage support has been paid to over 4.5 million workers through the special UIF TERS scheme. More than 1.3 billion has been provided in support, mainly for small and medium enterprises. In addition, over 70 billion rand in tax relief was extended to businesses in distress.
Political and social analyst Tessa Dooms joins us now to share her insights on the State of the Nation address, and she's speaking to us from Johannesburg. Tessa, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme. Your thoughts on the SONA, I suppose, you know, and I hate this because every year we say the most difficult one yet, but for sure this year, with the global pandemic as a backdrop, was exceptionally difficult.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this would have been a very difficult decision about what needs to be the priorities of the speech, given the multiple crises that we came into 2020 with, and how that's been exacerbated and laid bare by COVID-19. Surely deciding what the priorities would have been difficult. We saw a bit of a meandering in the speech away from those 4 priorities towards the last quarter of the speech, just to kind of touch on some of the other issues like crime, gender-based violence, just in passing, just to realize that we still have those other issues going on. But certainly it was important to prioritize, and it was important to be able to speak to certain things that the president seems to feel more certain about than others.
All right. I mean, you know, when they talk about State of the Nation, we're never quite sure what this speech is meant to be. Is it to genuinely describe the state of the nation, or is it about this is what we're going to do, almost like a budget speech in many ways?
Really, it has to be both. It has to be a reflection backwards and an accounting of what has been done in the previous year, and it has to be a casting of vision forward, especially in anticipation of a budget speech that's coming up. And I think what we've seen in this SONA is quite a weird package of things. We've seen a bit of a reflection back. We've seen the president talk about the Lanseria smart city idea that's been coming a few SONAs on. We've seen the president speak about the youth employment programs that he was speaking about last year and the ways in which they've been incorporated into the presidential employment stimulus. And then we've seen him speak about these big infrastructure projects that seem to cast quite far into the future, but we don't really get a very good sense of a good accounting for what happened during the pandemic in 2020. What happened to the failures around some of the SME support, some of the bank loans that didn't go out, what happened around the SASSA grants and just the social relief system that was so slow in grinding in the beginning. And so we didn't see enough accountability, and some of the things casting into the future seem very far away from the realities that we face right now.
And in some ways, what a pandemic disruption can do is give you a get-out-of-jail-free card that kind of says, I would have done so much more had it not been for the pandemic. But having said that, this is what we're going to try and do.
Absolutely. I would take it a step further, that a pandemic gives you so much more that you need to accomplish. So many things that you have to do that you cannot get out of. And unfortunately, in many of the areas that the state had set up for itself in terms of what it needed to do in terms of the pandemic response, it's just not yielded the kind of results that the president would have liked. I mean, he did point out a few successes, the 600,000 job opportunities that had been created for young people, for example, in the short term. And so you see him kind of grasping at a few things, but there were so many things that needed to get done that if done properly, this could have been a really successful SONA speech saying we got into a pandemic mode, our systems were tested, our ministers were tested, our departments were tested, but we actually learned, we grew, we actually delivered on things that we probably didn't think we were capable of. And I don't think the president could say that with any amount of certainty. And so we saw this kind of hankering to the future rather than a real contemplation of the present realities that South Africa faces.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the specifics. COVID-19 for sure. This time a year ago, people were talking about the right man at the right time to take on a pandemic. A year and a bit later, do you think that tonight he inspired enough confidence in the people that the COVID pandemic is being controlled and the vaccine rollout will happen and it will reach the people that it needs to reach in time?
COVID actually got a very small showing in this speech tonight with a focus on vaccines. And I think the president was a little gun-shy and skittish given what's happened over the weekend with the COVID bungles, to give too many details around what needs to happen. He's given us 3 figures to work towards: the Johnson & Johnson 9 million, the COVAX facility 12 million that should be coming, and then the Pfizer 20 million. But none of those have clear timelines. None of those are, cast in stone in many ways, because I think the president does want to tread carefully around that. And we still have a lot of unanswered questions that could have been addressed tonight about what this vaccine rollout is actually going to look like in practical terms. And more importantly, what do we do in the meantime? We're not expecting the whole country to be vaccinated this year. And so we're looking at another year, 18 months of having this pandemic in this limbo. And the president didn't address that, I think, adequately. So we're left with a few numbers around vaccines, but very little in terms of detail.
Some social relief, the 350 Rand grant extended for another 3 months, which will be good news for some people who are genuinely, literally sort of living from hand to mouth at this stage. And also the UIF fund, but that's only up until the middle of March. So perhaps that could see a bit of strain quite soon.
Yeah, I mean, the UIF is not even really an extension in as much as it's catching up with backlogs that weren't finished in time. The 3-month extension on the 350 grant in itself is a very short-term measure and exposed the gaping hole in the president's speech, which is this discussion about the basic income grant. And there've been rumblings we've heard out of social development, we've heard in the NEDLAC process around discussions on the basic income grant, and really nothing from the president about that. And so the speech very much was a short-term speech in terms of looking forward. We only can look forward really in the next few months, and by then we get to the end of the financial year. So one then asks oneself, what will Tito Mboweni as the finance minister be telling us in a few weeks' time? Because it doesn't seem that the president has told us very much about what happens beyond March, April this year, when it comes to some of the big ticket items that we've seen some of the redirect of spend on. And it feels very woolly and very fuzzy at this point, especially when we need, not only social relief on a humanitarian level, but we need that money coming into the economy and coming into people's hands. So it's transacting in the local economy so that we keep not only people out of hunger, but we also keep those small and micro enterprises and informal businesses with customers in hand.
All right, and talking about detail, I suppose maybe when the budget is read out and the various cabinet ministers explain how they're going to spend their money, he's pinning a lot of hope on creating jobs and economic recovery. And I'm just wondering where that's going to come from realistically.
We really don't know at this point. Like I said, the 600,000 jobs that he speaks about in the presidential employment stimulus, many of those jobs only have a runway right now until the end of this financial year, and we get no sense of what happens beyond that point. And then we have all of these big infrastructure projects, for example, and none of them have a timeline that's definite. We don't see them necessarily rolling out this year, and that's where you would expect some of this job creation to come from. And we all know that the private sector is highly constrained at this point, and SMEs, we're only looking at 15,000 being supported by 2024. So, so many unanswered questions about where jobs are actually going to come from if in the short term, we are not actually creating long-term jobs and sustainable jobs. And in the long term, we have no idea when those big projects are going to come that are meant to take up low-skilled workers in the country. I just feel like we have a plan that does not tell us anything that will help us for the next 12 months in this country, and that is a missed opportunity.
All right. A new anti-corruption body in the offing, and one wonders if one needs another one or it's just making the ones that we have better and more effective. Because there's no question that if you can stop corruption, there's billions of rand already available to do other things.
I mean, the president, in creating this body, seems to be deferring some of his political powers and the powers in the executive to a body that doesn't really have a shape or a form. We don't even know who will be in that body, and that will report to Parliament. Whereas the president in his office has the ability to hire and fire, has the ability to direct government in terms of how you deal with and give consequences when corruption is found in the system. It's all good and well to say that the judicial system and the crime fighters need to go out there and capture people and take them to jail. But what are the responsibilities of a president in this time? What are the political steps that he's taking? What skin does he have in the game? Why is it that his own ministers are not going to be held to account? We talk about these performance contracts, and he says nothing about how the consequence management even for that works. And so I don't think that it's a good idea to outsource something that is so directly linked to the powers of the president, both in government and in the governing party, where a lot of this corruption finds its roots. I think the president is kicking the can down the road or kicking it into somebody else's hands and people who are not elected officials when he is the one with the power.
Some people might say another can that's been kicked down the road for 27 years is land reform. He talks about it, but it has been spoken about a lot of times in the past, and one wasn't sure whether there really was a way to solve this once and for all. And I wonder if you feel, after listening to him today, that this Land and Agrarian Reform Agency coming soon will fare any better.
Yeah, the president speaks about the localization of the economy. And one gets a sense that we're talking still about quite the macro economy, the big players in the space, especially in the agriculture space. And we're talking about manufacturing and agriculture. But I can imagine if you're sitting in a rural village in this country and you're looking around you and there are land parcels around, but there's just no access or no support. If you heard or saw yourself reflected in that speech today, I just think that we should think about localization very differently in this country and start talking about what are we doing in the rural village to make sure that a local ecosystem and economy is built that includes land, that includes markets, that includes the utilization of skills. We had no rural development aspects to this speech at all. And the land kind of gets thrown in at the end, as opposed to being a central part of the economic recovery project that can focus in on localities, that can focus in on community entrepreneurship, and really, again, build the economy from below, as opposed to waiting from investment from above.
All right, and then we are part of an international community, a world that's now trying to find ways to reconnect and try and do business with each other. We've got the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Do you think you heard enough in the speech to talk about how we step out and be part of the international community again? Because the vaccines are coming, but we can't wait, actually, until everybody's vaccinated. We've got to get going.
Absolutely. And as the outgoing of the chair of the AU, you would have expected, and because South Africa is actually the head of the Secretariat of that Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, you would have expected some meat and bones there. We're talking about economic opportunities, economic recovery, yet we're talking about it as if we're in a vacuum, as if we're insular. Where are some of those opportunities going to come from on the continent? How is the continent going to begin to trade with the rest of the world? If we remain insular and inward looking, and we don't take advantage of what's happening on the continent, we are missing an opportunity there. I mean, the other thing that was kind of an Easter egg thrown in on the side was Operation Vulindlela, which seems to be speaking about getting in scarce skills from China, from Kenya. That also wasn't really clarified, because we already have critical skills lists. So where would these scarce skills be coming from, and why would they be coming in this particular form? So again, just little hints and nudges towards things without real laid out plans or targets or even timeframes.
All right, and like Fynbos, South Africa will rise again. Do you believe?
You know, the problem with Fynbos is that you have to burn the whole thing down, by that metaphor. And we can't afford to burn the whole thing down. What we need to do is work with what we have with a lot of urgency. And I don't want the country to burn in any form or any shape. And I hope that as the Fynbos, we're going to be able to resurge out of this, but it shouldn't take us burning everything down first before we're able to do that.
Tessa Dooms, great talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for your insights this day. Thank you.